Demi Lovato's story starts the way a lot of kids to now legends begin, with a child who looks fearless on camera long before they feel fearless inside. She grew up in Texas, in a home where music and emotions were always close to the surface. As a kid, she could sing like it was a reflex, loud, clear, unfiltered. Adults noticed the talent early, and the industry did what it always does when it sees a young performer who can deliver. It moved fast. One moment, she's a regular kid with a strong voice and a stubborn streak. And the next, she's learning how to behave under lights, how to smile on cue, how to be professional before she's even old enough to understand what that word costs. Her earliest TV work put her in a familiar, safe-looking world, the kind of set that makes childhood feel like a bright, controlled stage. But there's a hidden tension in every child star beginning. You're praised for being mature, for being easy to direct, for not causing problems. And when you're praised that way, you start to believe love is something you earn by performing. Demi's kid era wasn't just training for acting, it was training for survival in public. Every appearance taught the same lesson. The camera rewards control. The crowd rewards confidence. Silence can be misunderstood. Emotion must be packaged. Then the Disney era arrived and turned her into a symbol. When Camp Rock hit, Demi wasn't just another teen singer. She became a face that represented a whole generation's idea of the next one. Overnight, she was placed in the classic Disney machine: movies, music, tours, interviews, red carpets, and the constant expectation that you should be grateful every second of your life. The problem is that gratitude doesn't erase pressure. The schedules stay packed. The opinions stay loud. And the audience starts to treat your growth like a product release. They want the new version, but only if it still feels like the old version. At that age, identity is supposed to be messy. You're supposed to try on different looks and personalities in private, with your friends, and laugh at your mistakes later. Demi did it on the internet, in magazines, in paparazzi shots, with millions of strangers scoring her like a competition. The public talked about her body, her voice, her relationships, her attitude, sometimes like they were analyzing a character, not a teenager. When you're a teen idol, the world often rewards extremes: cute or sexy, angel or rebel, perfect or canceled. The in-between is where real people live, but it's the place the internet rarely allows. And Demi had something else, a voice that made people listen. She wasn't the light, airy pop girl stereotype. She had power, big notes, grit, emotion that sounded lived in even when she was still young. That voice helped her break out of the Disney box, but it also raised the stakes. When you're known for talent, people expect you to be invincible. They expect you to carry the whole room, every time. They don't imagine you might be carrying fear at the same time. Fear of failing, fear of disappointing, fear of not being the right version of yourself for the moment. Behind the scenes, the pressure started to show up in the ways it always does for young stars. Exhaustion, anxiety, the sense that you're constantly being evaluated. Fame doesn't just amplify your wins, it amplifies your insecurities. And for Demi, the early cracks weren't a shock twist. They were the natural result of growing up inside an industry that rewards output more reliably than it protects a nervous system. That's what makes the early era so haunting when you rewatch it. You can see how hard she's working to look okay. Touring in those years could feel like living inside a moving hallway. Airports, backstage corridors, hotel rooms, then a stage that asks you to explode with energy as if you slept. Teen stardom is still a workplace, and it rarely respects a teenager's limits. Demi's fans loved her because she sounded honest, but honesty can become another expectation. People want you to keep giving them feelings, even when your own feelings are overloaded. The praise becomes a clock. Keep shining. Keep smiling, keep delivering. Still, the rise was real. She wasn't a one-project wonder. She built a career quickly, music that climbed charts, performances that proved her live ability, and a fan base that felt personal because her emotions felt real. Demi's kid-to-teen chapter is all momentum. A bright launch, a loud spotlight, a voice that made her impossible to ignore, and a public that believed it was watching a simple success story. But the truth is, the most dangerous part of a success story is the moment when everyone assumes you're fine, because that's usually when you stop asking for help. The middle of Demi's timeline is where the story stops being celebrity rise and becomes something darker, the cost of being watched while you're still becoming yourself. This is the era where the public sees moments and makes them into a narrative, while the real person is trying to survive the days between the moments. It's also the era where many former child stars hit a wall because childhood fame teaches you to push through everything, and adulthood eventually demands you stop. For Demi, the struggle wasn't a single bad year. It was a pattern of pressure meeting vulnerability. There were earlier pauses and wake-up calls too, moments where she stepped back from the machine not to quit, but to breathe. In a culture that treats non-stop productivity as proof of strength, stepping away can look like weakness to outsiders. For a performer, it can also feel terrifying. If you stop, will the world forget you? That fear keeps many young stars running straight through burnout. Demi's timeline shows the opposite lesson. Sometimes stopping is the only way to stay alive. The public rarely applauds the decisions, therapy appointments, medical checkups, turning down opportunities, but those are the decisions that build a future. And when she did return, the bravest choice was refusing to let the crowd define the timeline. Healing took longer than a news cycle, even when applause was replaced by doubt. She spoke publicly over time about mental health and addiction, and her story became one of the most visible modern examples of how talent can coexist with pain. The industry loves the word strong, but strength without rest becomes a kind of self-erasure. Demi's work ethic kept her moving even when the inside was unstable, and the audience, used to consuming her as a performer, could miss the warning signs until they became headlines. The public tends to flatten these chapters into scandal, but the reality is more human and more frightening. When you're overwhelmed, you can start making choices that feel like relief in the moment and consequences later. Demi's timeline includes a near-fatal medical crisis in 2018 that she later described as an overdose that led to serious health complications, including strokes and a heart attack. That's a brutal sentence to read because it's not metaphorical. It's not rock bottom as a dramatic phrase. It's the body almost shutting down. This is the emotional peak of her story, not because it's sensational, but because it exposes the gap between how the world talks about celebrities and what they actually are. Celebrities are bodies. They bleed, they panic, they break. And in Demi's case, survival wasn't guaranteed. When she later spoke about that period in her documentary work, it reframed the entire before era. The bright Disney years weren't just cute nostalgia. They were the beginning of a pressure system that eventually became unbearable. And here's the part people don't like to admit. The internet often rewards collapse. It treats pain like content. It treats hospitalization like a plot twist. It treats recovery like a redemption arc you must perform perfectly or be criticized again. Demi had to recover while being watched by people who felt entitled to updates, explanations, and proof that she was better. But recovery doesn't work like that. Recovery is not linear. It's not always pretty. It's not always inspiring. Sometimes it's just waking up and choosing to stay alive again. The hardest truth in Demi's Kids to Now story is that the persona people loved, confident, funny, outspoken, was also a person who needed safety. And the world doesn't hand safety to celebrities. It sells it back to them as privacy. So she had to build boundaries. She had to decide what parts of her story were hers and not the internet's. She had to learn how to be a human first and a brand second. This chapter also forces a bigger question. Why do child stars often end up here? The answer isn't weakness, it's exposure. You grow up receiving adult pressure, adult money, adult access, adult judgment, and adult temptation while your brain is still developing. The audience wants a flawless role model, but the environment is engineered for stress. Demi's crisis became a public lesson because it happened to someone visible enough that the public couldn't look away. But it also happened to a person who, like many, was carrying too much for too long. And yet, this is where the story refuses to end as tragedy. The fact that Demi lived is the pivot, because survival creates a new responsibility to rebuild life in a way that can actually hold you. That means not just making music again, but changing the conditions that made collapse possible. It means learning to walk away, to say no, to protect the nervous system. It means forgiving yourself for not being the perfect version of recovery that strangers want to watch. The now era of Demi Lovato's story isn't about pretending the dark years didn't happen. It's about refusing to let them be the only headline. And that's what makes her current chapter powerful. It's not a clean makeover, it's a conscious rebuild. She didn't just return to work. She returned with more control over the narrative, more honesty about what fame cost her, and a clearer sense of what she wants her life to be when the cameras aren't rolling. A huge part of that shift came through storytelling on her own terms. When an artist makes a documentary about their worst moments, it's risky. It invites judgment, but it also steals power back from gossip. Demi's docuseries work didn't feel like a publicity stunt. It felt like a boundary drawn in public ink. It said, "If you're going to talk about my life, you will do it with the truth, not with rumors." That matters in a culture where the loudest story often wins. Then there's the music itself. Demi's voice, once packaged as teen pop energy, grew into something heavier and more textured. In her later work, she leaned into rock elements and more adult themes, and the sound fits the story. Not as shock, but as strength. And you can hear something else in the now performances. Pacing. Early fame teaches you to sprint. More content, more appearances, more wins. Adult recovery teaches you to pace because your body remembers what collapse felt like. Demi's modern chapter is full of quieter proof. Choosing collaborators carefully, protecting rehearsal time, building routines that don't depend on adrenaline, and treating the voice like a living instrument that needs rest. That kind of professionalism isn't flashy, but it's the real flex after public chaos. The public also started listening differently. When a star survives something severe, fans often split into two groups: those who demand constant inspiration and those who simply want the person to be okay. Demi's healthiest now moments lean toward the second group. Less performance of perfection, more permission to be imperfect and still valuable. That permission is what makes her story useful for viewers who aren't famous too. You don't have to be at your best to deserve love, and you don't have to be fixed to deserve a future. What's most interesting is how her relationship with the public changed. As a teen idol, she was expected to be endlessly accessible. As an adult survivor, she began to choose distance. She still shows up, but she doesn't perform constant availability. That's not coldness, it's health. It's the difference between being liked and being safe. And for someone whose life was once shaped by being watched, choosing privacy can be the most radical act. This is also where her legacy becomes bigger than entertainment. Demi's openness about recovery, mental health, and the realities of addiction has helped normalize conversations that many families avoid. That doesn't mean she should be treated as a perfect spokesperson. No human can carry that role without breaking again. But it does mean her survival has created a kind of map for people who feel alone. When someone that famous admits to being that vulnerable, it cracks the illusion that you have to look okay to be worthy. And the kids to now contrast becomes more emotional the older you get. You start seeing the child on those early sets and realizing how much of that child's job was to reassure adults. You start realizing how little control she truly had over the machine. The nostalgia changes flavor. It's still sweet, but it's also protective. You want that kid to be safe. You want that kid to have the kind of adulthood that doesn't require collapsing to be taken seriously. That's the open ending here. Demi's story is still being written, but the direction matters. The now era isn't just back on top. It's building a life that doesn't demand self-destruction to feel alive. It's learning that stability is not boring, it's freedom. And if you watch her performances now, you can feel something. A person who has survived the worst kind of public vulnerability and still chooses to make art anyway. The next chapter can be quieter and still meaningful. Fewer headlines, more craft, and a life designed to stay standing. So when you place Kid Demi next to Now Demi, the biggest difference isn't the hair, the fashion, the genre, or the confidence. It's ownership. The kid was loved as a product. The adult is respected as a person. The kid had to perform strength. The adult had to build it. And that's why this story resonates far beyond fandom. It's proof that a life can continue after the chapter the internet tried to make final.